They told him he'd freeze to death before morning, left him and his child alone in that abandoned house during the worst blizzard in 50 years. But what his cruel in-laws didn't know was that beneath those frozen floorboards lay a secret worth $295 million. And the man they tried to destroy was about to become unstoppable. Before we explore this incredible story, make sure to smash subscribe because tomorrow we have an extra special story for you that will blow your mind. The windshield wipers couldn't keep up with the snow. Darius Mitchell gripped the steering wheel of his 15-year-old Toyota Camry as it crawled along the mountain road. Each gust of wind threatened to push the small car into the ditch. Beside him, 7-year-old Owen pressed his face against the cold window, his breath fogging the glass as he traced patterns with his tiny finger. "Dad, I can't see anything," Owen whispered, his voice small and worried. Darius's jaw tightened. He couldn't either. The snow had transformed from gentle flurries into a wall of white that swallowed the road, the trees, the entire world. He should have turned back an hour ago. He should have never agreed to this trip in the first place. But his mother-in-law's voice on the phone 3 days earlier had been so insistent, so urgent. "You need to come to the property, Darius. There are documents about Celeste's estate that require your signature. Legal matters, time-sensitive matters. You can't keep avoiding us." Darius had wanted to say no. God, how he'd wanted to refuse. It had been 8 months since Celeste died. 8 months since the car accident that shattered his world and left him alone with a grief so heavy he could barely breathe under its weight. 8 months of silence from her family until now, until they needed something. The Hartwell family had never accepted him. From the moment Celeste brought him home at age 23, fresh out of community college with paint under his nails from his job at the art supply warehouse, they'd made their feelings clear. He wasn't good enough, wasn't educated enough, wasn't from the right kind of family. Celeste's mother, Vivian, had thin lips that pressed together in disapproval every time Darius spoke. Her father, Gerald, barely acknowledged his existence except to make comments about Celeste marrying down. Only Celeste's older sister, Vanessa, had been worse. She looked at Darius like he was something she'd scraped off her shoe, like he'd trapped her baby sister into marriage and fatherhood. Never mind that Celeste had been the one to pursue him, to fall in love with his laugh and his capability, his strength and his softness. Never mind that their marriage had been built on real love, real partnership. But Celeste was gone now, and Darius was alone with her family's contempt. The GPS on his phone flickered, then died. No signal, of course. They were too far up the mountain, too far from civilization. Darius's hands ached from gripping the wheel. The property his in-laws had directed him to was another 40 minutes up this winding road, assuming he didn't slide off into oblivion first. "Dad, I'm cold," Owen said softly. Darius glanced at his son, bundled in his blue winter coat, the one they'd found at the thrift store last month. Guilt twisted in his stomach. He reached over and squeezed Owen's small hand. "I know, buddy. We'll be there soon, and we'll get warm. I promise." It was a promise he desperately hoped he could keep. The house appeared through the snow like a ghost, materializing from the white void. It was larger than Darius expected, a 2-story structure made of dark wood and stone with a steep roof designed to shed snow. In the driveway sat 3 vehicles, Gerald's silver Mercedes, Vivian's white Lexus, and Vanessa's black Range Rover. All expensive, all pristine despite the weather. All so different from Darius's struggling Camry with its check engine light and worn tires. Darius pulled in beside them and killed the engine. For a moment, he just sat there, gathering his courage. Owen had fallen asleep against the window, his dark hair falling across his face. He looked so much like Celeste it hurt. "Owen, buddy, we're here." Owen stirred, blinking sleep from his eyes. "Are they nice, Dad?" "Mom's family." Darius's throat tightened. He'd kept Owen away from the Hartwells for the most part, always finding excuses, always dodging invitations. Celeste had understood. She'd been trying to build bridges, slowly working to make her family see Darius the way she did. But then the accident happened, and those bridges burned before they were ever built. "Just stay close to me," Okay. They climbed out into the brutal cold. The wind hit Darius like a physical blow, stealing his breath. Snow stung his face and hands. He grabbed their overnight bag from the back. Vivian had insisted they stay the night given the weather, and took Owen's hand. Together, they fought their way to the front door. Darius knocked, then knocked again, harder. Finally, the door swung open. Vanessa stood there, tall and sharp-eyed, her expression as cold as the wind at Darius's back. She wore an expensive sweater and held a glass of what looked like whiskey. Behind her, Darius could see warm light, hear the crackle of a fire. "You made it," she said flatly. Not a greeting, just a statement of fact. She didn't move aside to let them in. "Vanessa," Darius said, keeping his voice steady. "It's freezing. Can we come in?" She looked at him for a long moment, then down at Owen, who shrank behind Darius's leg. Something flickered across her face. Was it satisfaction? Before she finally stepped back. The interior of the house was beautiful in a cold, show-home way. Hardwood floors, high ceilings, furniture that looked expensive but not inviting. A massive stone fireplace dominated one wall of the main room, flames dancing behind an ornate screen. Vivian sat on a leather sofa near the fire, her silver hair perfectly styled, her cashmere sweater probably costing more than Darius's monthly rent. Gerald stood by the window, staring out at the storm. Neither of them acknowledged Darius's arrival. "Hello," Darius said quietly, setting down their bag. "Thank you for inviting us." Vivian's eyes finally shifted to him, cool and appraising. "You're late. We expected you 2 hours ago. The roads are dangerous. The snow. We've been waiting," she cut in. "Gerald has business back in the city tomorrow. This delay is inconvenient." Darius bit back his response. He'd just driven through a blizzard with his son in a car that barely had heat, and they were worried about inconvenience. "Where are the documents you mentioned?" Darius asked, forcing himself to stay focused. "You said there were papers about Celeste's estate that needed my signature." Vanessa moved to a side table and picked up a folder. She held it out, but didn't step closer, forcing Darius to walk over and take it. He opened it and scanned the pages. His stomach dropped. These weren't estate documents. They were custody papers, legal forms requesting that Gerald and Vivian Hartwell be granted full custody of Owen Hartwell Mitchell on the grounds that Darius was an unfit parent due to financial instability and insufficient educational background. "What is this?" Darius's voice shook. "It's what's best for the child," Vivian said, her tone clipped. "You can barely support yourself, Darius. Living in that cramped apartment, working that hourly job. Celeste's son deserves better." "Celeste's son has a parent," Darius said, his hands trembling with anger. "Me. And there is no way in hell I'm signing these." "We thought you might say that." Gerald spoke for the first time, his voice deep and heavy with authority. "Which is why we brought you here, to discuss it reasonably, away from lawyers and courts. Family business should stay in the family." "I'm family," Darius said, though even as he said it, he knew they didn't believe it. Had never believed it. Vanessa laughed, short and bitter. "You were family when Celeste was alive. Now you're just the man who trapped her and is keeping us from our grandson." "I loved her," Darius said, his voice breaking. "I loved her more than anything." "Then prove it," Vivian said coldly. "Give Owen the life he deserves with us. We have resources, education, opportunities. What do you have? Debts and a job that leaves you smelling like paint thinner." Owen's small hand slipped into Darius's. "Dad." Darius looked down at his son, saw the confusion and fear in those dark eyes, and something hardened inside him. He'd been poor his whole life. He'd been looked down on, dismissed, treated like he was less than. But he'd also survived. He'd worked 2 jobs to put himself through community college. He'd built a life with Celeste based on love and partnership, and he'd be damned if he let these people take his son. "No," Darius said firmly. "The answer is no. We're leaving." He grabbed their bag and turned toward the door. Behind him, he heard Vanessa set down her glass. "I wouldn't do that if I were you," she said. Darius turned back. All three of them were standing now, forming a kind of wall between him and the fire's warmth. The temperature in the room seemed to drop. "The storm's getting worse," Gerald said, gesturing to the window. The snow outside was now a solid curtain of white. Leaving now would be dangerous, irresponsible. The kind of decision an unfit parent might make. It was a threat, and they all knew it. "Then we'll wait out the storm," Darius said, "and leave first thing in the morning." Vivian's smile was thin and cruel. "Of course. We have a room prepared for you. Vanessa will show you." Vanessa led them through the house to a back hallway. The warmth from the fireplace didn't reach here. The walls were bare, the floor cold. She opened a door at the end of the hall. "This is the old caretaker's quarters," she said. "It's all that's available." Darius looked into the room, and his heart sank. It was barely more than a storage space, a single narrow bed, a small window already frosted over, and no heating vent that he could see. The temperature inside was maybe only a few degrees warmer than outside. "You can't be serious," Darius said. Vanessa shrugged. "Take it or don't. But you're not sleeping in the main house." She walked away without another word, her footsteps echoing down the hall. Darius and Owen entered the small room. There was a thin blanket on the bed, nothing else. No extra bedding in the closet, which held only empty hangers and mouse droppings. The single overhead bulb flickered when Darius flipped the switch, casting weak yellow light. "Dad, it's really cold," Owen said, his teeth already starting to chatter. Darius pulled his son close. "I know, buddy. Come here." They climbed onto the bed together, and Darius wrapped them both in his coat and the thin blanket. Outside, the wind howled. The window rattled. Through the thin walls, Darius could hear voices from the main house, the Hartwells, warm by their fire, discussing him like he was a problem to be solved rather than a person. A father. Celeste's husband. Grief hit him then, sharp and sudden. Celeste should be here. Celeste would have never let this happen. She'd protected him from her family's cruelty, stood between him and their judgment. Without her, he was alone in enemy territory with nothing but his determination and his son depending on him. "Tell me a story about Mom," Owen whispered against his chest. Darius swallowed hard. "What kind of story?" "A happy one." So Darius told him about the first time he met Celeste. How she'd come into the art supply warehouse where he worked, searching for a specific type of canvas. How he'd helped her find exactly what she needed and she'd been so grateful. How she'd asked him about his own art, and he'd been so surprised that someone like her wanted to know. How they'd gotten coffee that same afternoon, and she'd listened to him talk about his dreams with such genuine interest. How on their second date, they'd driven up into the mountains and watched the sunset, and she'd held his hand and told him he was the most genuine person she'd ever met. Owen's breathing eventually deepened into sleep. Darius held him tighter, staring at the frosted window where snow piled higher and higher against the glass. Hours passed. The cold intensified. Darius's body ached from shivering, from trying to keep Owen warm with nothing but his own body heat. The thin blanket did almost nothing. He could see his breath in the air, great clouds of vapor that hung in the freezing darkness. Around 3 o'clock in the morning, he heard footsteps in the hallway. They paused outside his door. Darius held his breath, heart pounding. Then he heard voices, Vanessa and Gerald speaking in low tones. "Won't last the night in there. Storm's getting worse. Roads completely snowed in. His own choice. In the morning we'll find them." The voices faded. Darius's blood ran cold, and this time it had nothing to do with the temperature. They'd put him in this room knowing how cold it was. Knowing the storm would trap them here. Knowing that by morning he and Owen could be. No. He wouldn't let that happen. Darius carefully extracted himself from Owen's embrace and stood. His legs had gone numb from the cold, pins and needles shooting through them as blood flow returned. He moved to the door and tried the handle. Locked. They'd locked him in. Panic clawed at Darius's throat. He was trapped in a freezing room with his son while a blizzard raged outside, and his in-laws had made it clear they wanted him out of Owen's life. The pieces clicked together in his mind with horrible clarity. If something happened to him, if he died of exposure, they could claim it was a tragic accident. A father who made poor decisions, who took his child into dangerous weather, who didn't know how to handle mountain storms. They'd get custody of Owen, and there would be no one to say otherwise. He moved to the window, trying to open it, but it had been painted shut years ago. The glass was single pane, old and thin. He could break it, but then what? Climb out into a blizzard with a 7-year-old? They die even faster out there. Think, Darius. Think. He searched the room more thoroughly, looking for anything that could help. In the closet, behind the empty hangers, he found an old work coat, stiff with age and dust, but heavy. He wrapped it around Owen. Under the bed, nothing but dust and a dead mouse. The floor. Darius knelt, running his hands over the old wooden planks. Some were loose, warped with age and moisture. He worked his fingers under one and pulled. It came up with a creak. The space beneath was dark and dusty, but when he reached down, his hand met cold metal, a handle. His heart raced as he pulled up more floorboards. Beneath them was a trap door, old and heavy, with a rusted but still functional latch. Darius pulled it open. Cold air rushed up, even colder than the room. Stone steps led down into darkness. He couldn't see the bottom. A cellar. There was a cellar beneath this room. Darius looked back at Owen, still sleeping under the thin blanket and work coat. He looked at the locked door. He thought about the voices in the hallway, about custody papers and the cold calculation in Vivian's eyes. He had to make a choice, stay here and hope they let him out in the morning, assuming he and Owen survived the night. Or go down into the unknown darkness and pray it led somewhere safer. The wind screamed outside, rattling the window so hard he thought it might shatter. The temperature continued to drop. Owen whimpered in his sleep. Darius made his decision. He gently woke Owen. "Buddy, I need you to be very brave right now." "Okay?" Owen's eyes opened, confused and scared. "Dad, we're going on an adventure. A quiet one. Can you be quiet?" Owen nodded, though his chin trembled. Darius gathered their bag, wrapped Owen in both coats, and lifted his son onto his back. Then, carefully, he began to descend the stone steps into the cellar. The darkness was absolute. Darius felt his way down, one hand on the cold stone wall, feet testing each step before committing his weight. Owen's arms were tight around his neck, his small body shivering. "I'm scared," Owen whispered. "Me too, buddy. But we're together, and that's all that matters." The steps went down much farther than Darius expected. 20 steps, 30. The air grew colder but also stiller, protected from the wind that rattled the house above. Finally, his foot touched level ground. Darius felt in his pocket and found his phone. Dead battery, of course, but he remembered packing a small flashlight for emergencies. He set Owen down carefully and dug through the bag until his fingers closed around it. The beam clicked on, weak but functional. What it revealed made Darius's breath catch. They were standing in a massive underground chamber, far larger than the small room above. The walls were stone, old and carefully constructed. But that wasn't what shocked him. The chamber was lined with shelves, and on those shelves were boxes, crates, and objects covered in white cloth that had yellowed with age. In the center of the room stood something that looked like a massive safe, old-fashioned, with a combination dial and heavy handle. And everywhere, on every surface not covered by the white cloth, was frost. Ice crystals glittered in the flashlight beam like diamonds. "Dad, what is this place?" Owen's voice echoed off the stone. "I don't know, buddy, but it's out of the wind, and that's something." Darius explored the space, Owen holding tight to his hand. The chamber was roughly 40 feet across, with a ceiling high enough that his flashlight beam didn't quite reach it. The temperature was brutally cold, maybe even colder than the room above, but the stone walls blocked the wind, and that made it paradoxically more survivable. He found more crates stacked against one wall. Darius pried one open and found blankets inside, old but thick and made of wool. Another crate held old clothes, vintage pieces from decades ago. A third held what looked like camping equipment, an old camp stove, fuel canisters, matches in a waterproof container. Someone had prepared this place, stocked it like a shelter or a hiding place. Darius's mind raced. He knew from Celeste that the Hartwell family had owned property in these mountains for generations, that this house had belonged to Gerald's father before him. But why would someone build something like this? And why keep it stocked? Those questions could wait. Right now, he needed to keep Owen alive. He spread out several wool blankets in the corner farthest from the stairs, creating a nest. He wrapped Owen in layers of the old clothes and blankets until only his face peeked out. "Better?" Darius asked. Owen nodded, though he still shivered. "What about you, Dad?" "I'm okay. I need to look around a little more. Make sure we're safe." Darius explored the rest of the chamber. Behind the large safe, he found something that made him pause, a leather-bound journal, thick and obviously old, sitting on a small desk carved into an alcove in the stone wall. Beside it was an old oil lamp and matches. He lit the lamp carefully, and warm light bloomed in the darkness. It was enough to see by, enough to read. Darius opened the journal to the first page. The handwriting was elegant but faded. Property of Theodore Hartwell, May 1958. If you're reading this, then you found my sanctuary. May it serve you as well as it served me. Hartwell. Celeste's family. This cellar, this shelter, it had been built by Celeste's grandfather. Darius flipped through pages filled with careful notes, drawings, and what looked like business records. Theodore Hartwell had been methodical, documenting everything about this hidden space. He couldn't read it all now, not with Owen waiting and his own body starting to shut down from cold and exhaustion. But one entry caught his eye, dated June 1963. The collection is complete. 75 pieces total, acquired over 15 years. Value estimated at $295 million in today's market. Vivian doesn't know. Gerald doesn't know. They believe I squandered my fortune. Let them believe it. This is my insurance, my legacy for whomever proves worthy enough to find it. Darius's hand shook as he read the words again. $295 million. 75 pieces of what? He looked around the chamber with new eyes. The covered shapes on the shelves. The massive safe. The careful preservation of this space. A collection. Theodore Hartwell had hidden a collection down here. Dad. Owen's voice was small. Can you come here now? I'm still cold. Darius set down the journal and returned to his son. He climbed into the nest of blankets, pulling Owen close, and used his own body to share warmth. The oil lamp cast dancing shadows on the stone walls. Above them, the blizzard raged. Above them, people who wanted to take his son slept in warm beds. Above them, the world was cruel and cold and hostile. But down here, in this forgotten space, Darius had found something. Not just shelter from the storm, but a secret, a legacy that Celeste's own family didn't know existed. He thought about the custody papers, about Vivian's cruel smile, about being locked in a freezing room to die. They tried to break him. They tried to eliminate him. They'd failed. Dad, Owen murmured, half asleep. Are we safe now? Darius looked at the journal lying on the desk, at the covered shelves, at the massive safe. He thought about Theodore Hartwell, who'd hidden a fortune from his own family, who'd called this place a sanctuary. Yes, buddy, Darius whispered into his son's hair. We're safe. And tomorrow everything changes. He held Owen close as the oil lamp burned low, and sleep finally claimed them both. His last conscious thought was of Celeste, wondering if somehow she'd led him here. If her grandfather's sanctuary had been waiting all along for the son-in-law her family tried to destroy. In the darkness, frost continued to form on the stone walls. And beneath those walls, a secret worth $295 million waited to be revealed. Darius woke to silence, the kind of silence that only comes when the world is buried under snow. For a moment, he didn't remember where he was. Then the cold seeped into his consciousness, the hard stone floor beneath layers of blankets, and the weight of Owen curled against his chest. The oil lamp had burned out hours ago. Weak grey light filtered down the stone steps from the room above, telling him it was morning. They'd survived the night. Owen stirred, his small voice muffled against Darius's shoulder. "Dad, I'm hungry." Darius's stomach clenched. In their rush to escape the freezing room, he hadn't thought about food. Their bag had some crackers and a granola bar, maybe not nearly enough if they were trapped down here. "Let me see what I can find, buddy." He carefully extracted himself from the blanket nest, his body protesting every movement. His muscles had locked up from the cold and from holding Owen all night. He was 31 years old and felt like he was 80. The chamber looked different in the morning light, less mysterious, more real. The frost on the walls caught the dim illumination, making everything sparkle. Darius could see his breath, great clouds of vapor that hung in the still air. He found the crate with camping supplies and dug deeper. Behind the old stove was a metal box, and inside were canned goods, soup, beans, vegetables, all decades old but sealed in cans that showed no signs of rust or damage. Theodore Hartwell had prepared this place for long-term survival. Darius used the camp stove carefully, melting snow that had drifted down the stone steps to make water, then heating a can of chicken noodle soup. The smell alone made him dizzy with hunger. He and Owen shared it straight from the can, taking turns with the single spoon he'd found. "It tastes funny," Owen said, but he ate every bite. "It's old, but it's safe. Your great-great-grandfather put it here a long time ago." Owen's eyes widened. "Really? Mom's grandpa? His grandpa's dad? He built this place?" After they ate, Darius knew he had to go back upstairs. He had to see if the Hartwells were looking for them, had to understand what was happening in the house above. He couldn't hide down here forever, even if part of him wanted to. "Owen, I need you to stay here while I check on something. Can you be brave for a few minutes?" Owen's face crumpled. "Don't leave me, Dad. I'll be right back. I promise. I just need to listen at the top of the stairs." He climbed the stone steps slowly, quietly. At the top, he pressed his ear against the underside of the trapdoor, which was still hidden beneath the floorboards of the room above. Voices, distant but audible. "Should check on them." That was Gerald, his tone concerned but not urgent. "Why?" Vanessa replied. "He made his choice. He refused our perfectly reasonable offer." "The child, Vanessa. We can't just..." "Can't just what?" Vanessa cut him off. "We gave them shelter, a room. It's not our fault if he was too proud to ask for more blankets. When we open that door and find them suffering from the cold, it will only prove our point about his inadequacy as a parent." Patricia's voice, cold and dismissive. Darius's hands clenched into fists. They knew exactly how cold that room was. They'd planned this. And if Gerald started. Then it was a tragic accident. Vanessa cut him off. A man who drove into a blizzard against advice, who didn't prepare properly, who made poor decisions. All documented, all legal. Silence. Then Gerald, this feels wrong. What feels wrong, Patricia said sharply, is letting Celeste's son be raised in poverty by someone with no education and no prospects. We're doing what's best for Owen. If Darius can't see that, if he won't cooperate, then nature will simply take its course. Darius backed down the stairs, his heart pounding so hard he thought it might break through his ribs. They were waiting for him to freeze, waiting to find his body and take Owen. This wasn't just cruelty. It was murder. He reached the bottom and found Owen standing wrapped in blankets, tears streaming down his face. "I heard them, Dad. I heard the bad people." Darius pulled his son close, kissing the top of his head. "They're not going to win, buddy. I promise you, they're not going to win." "How?" "We're trapped." Darius looked around the chamber, at Theodore's hidden sanctuary, at the journal on the desk, at the massive safe standing in the center of the room. "We're not trapped. We're exactly where we need to be." He spent the next hour reading more of Theodore's journal while Owen huddled in the blankets. The story that emerged was both heartbreaking and illuminating. Theodore Hartwell had been a collector, an enthusiast of rare and beautiful things. But his son Gerald, Celeste's father, had been a spendthrift, always demanding money, always in debt. Theodore had watched his fortune slowly drain away, given to a son who squandered everything. So Theodore had started a secret collection. He'd traveled, bought carefully, hidden his acquisitions. Then he'd built this chamber beneath the caretaker's quarters, the one place on the property his family never paid attention to. He'd moved his collection here piece by piece, telling Gerald he was downsizing, simplifying, preparing for death. "Let him think I died a poor man," Theodore had written. "Let him believe there's nothing left. This collection is for someone who understands value, not price. For someone who appreciates beauty, not just wealth. For someone worthy." The journal contained detailed inventories. Darius's hands shook as he read through the list. First edition book signed by Ernest Hemingway, F. Scott Fitzgerald, Mark Twain. Paintings by artists Darius recognized even with his limited art knowledge, Edward Hopper, Georgia O'Keeffe, Norman Rockwell. Rare coins, some dating back to the 1700s. Antique jewelry including pieces that had belonged to European nobility. Vintage wine from 1870. Musical instruments, a Stradivarius violin, a harpsichord from 1690. And stamps. Theodore's true passion had been stamps. Rare stamps, some of which were the only examples left in existence. Darius read one entry 3 times before believing it. Acquired the British Guiana 1-cent magenta today. Paid $200,000. Current value estimated at $9 million and climbing. She's the crown jewel of the collection. $9 million for a stamp. The total value Theodore had calculated in his final entry, $295,783,000. Written out in his careful handwriting, as if seeing the numbers spelled out made them more real. Darius set down the journal and looked at the covered shelves, at the safe. All of it was here, hidden beneath the house where Celeste's family had abandoned him to die. He thought about Celeste, about the woman he'd loved. He'd been nothing like his family, kind where they were cruel, generous where they were selfish. He'd worked as a teacher, lived modestly, never asked his family for money even when they'd struggled. Had he known about this? Had Theodore told him before he died? No. Celeste would have mentioned it, would have shared it with him. Which meant Theodore had died with his secret intact, and his family had no idea what slept beneath their property. "Dad, what are you thinking about?" Owen's voice pulled him from his thoughts. "I'm thinking about your mom and about how sometimes the best revenge is living well." Over the next 2 days, the blizzard continued to rage. Darius and Owen developed a routine in their underground sanctuary. They ate from Theodore's provisions, stayed warm in the nest of blankets, and slowly explored the chamber's contents. Darius taught Owen about the items they found, turning their survival into lessons. They looked at the rare books together, careful not to damage the fragile pages. Owen traced his fingers over the signatures of long-dead authors. "Why did the old man hide these, Dad?" "Because he loved them more than the people who would have sold them." They examined coins through a magnifying glass Darius found in one of the crates, identifying dates and origins. Owen was fascinated by a coin from 1776, the year America declared independence. "It's as old as our whole country," he breathed. Darius found himself opening up to Owen in ways he hadn't before, telling his son things about Celeste, about their relationship, about the family that had never accepted them. "Why didn't they like you, Dad?" Darius considered his answer carefully. Because I wasn't born with money. Because I worked with my hands instead of going to fancy schools. Because I didn't fit their idea of what Celeste should have married. That's stupid, Owen said with 7-year-old conviction. Yeah, buddy. It is. On the third day, Darius decided to open the safe. He'd been avoiding it, partly from fear of damaging whatever was inside, partly from the weight of what it represented. But the journal contained the combination, and his curiosity finally won out. He turned the dial carefully, following Theodore's instructions. Right to 34, left to 71, right to 19, left to 42. Something inside the safe clicked heavily. Darius pulled the handle. The door swung open with a sound like a sigh, as if the safe had been holding its breath for decades. Inside were the stamps. They were organized in albums, each stamp carefully mounted, documented, protected. Darius lifted the first album with trembling hands. Even with no knowledge of philately, he could tell these were extraordinary. Some were ancient, with handwritten cancellations. Others featured printing errors that made them unique. A few were so rare that Theodore had included newspaper clippings about them. And there, in a climate-controlled case at the back of the safe, was the British Guiana 1-cent magenta. A small octagonal stamp, unassuming to look at, worth more than most people earned in a lifetime. Darius sat back on his heels, overwhelmed. He'd thought he understood what Theodore had hidden. But seeing it, holding it, feeling the weight of history and value in his hands, it was something else entirely. Is that it, Dad? The treasure? Owen peered over his shoulder. Yeah, buddy. This is it. It doesn't look like treasure. It looks like Grandpa's old picture books. Darius laughed, startled by the sound in the cold chamber. That's the thing about real treasure, Owen. It doesn't always look valuable. You have to know what you're seeing. He carefully returned the albums to the safe and closed it. His mind was racing now, planning. The blizzard couldn't last forever. Eventually, the roads would clear, and when they did, he needed to be ready. That evening, as Owen slept, Darius wrote his own entry in Theodore's journal. He felt presumptuous doing it, adding his words to Theodore's careful documentation, but something compelled him to record this moment. My name is Darius Mitchell. I married your great-granddaughter, Celeste, and we had a son named Owen. Celeste died 8 months ago, and her family has been trying to take my son ever since. They locked us in a freezing room to die, but we found your sanctuary instead. I don't know if you can hear me wherever you are, but thank you. You saved us, and I promise I'll make sure your collection goes to people who will value it the way you did. Not just for money, but for beauty, for history, for all the things that matter more than wealth. What happens next will expose the cruelty, reveal a fortune that will change everything, and prove that sometimes survival is just the beginning of justice. Stay tuned to see what happens next. If you're enjoying the story, please like, share, and subscribe for more. On the 4th day, the wind finally stopped. The silence was so complete that Darius woke with a start, wondering if he'd gone deaf. Owen stirred beside him. Dad, it's quiet. The storm's over. They climbed to the top of the stairs and listened. Voices again, but different this time, urgent, worried. He should have come out by now. That was Gerald. Maybe he did. Maybe he got out and left. Vanessa, but she sounded uncertain. Left in a blizzard with a child? Don't be absurd. Patricia's voice was sharp. Check the room, Vanessa. Footsteps in the hallway above. Darius held his breath. The doorknob rattled. It's still locked. Then unlock it, you idiot. The sound of a key turning. The door opening. Silence. They're gone. What do you mean gone? I mean the room is empty. The window's intact. The door was locked from the outside, but they're not here. Chaos erupted above, voices overlapping, accusations flying. Darius listened to them search the house, heard their confusion turn to panic. They couldn't find the bodies they'd expected, which meant they didn't know about the cellar. Even Gerald, who'd grown up in this house, had no idea what his father had built. "We need to call the police," Gerald finally said. "And tell them what?" Vanessa snapped. "That the man we invited here vanished from a locked room. That we were so concerned about his welfare we waited for days to check on him." "This is your fault," Patricia hissed. "Both of you. I said we should have just fought him in court." "I don't care what you said. Find them. Now." Darius backed down the stairs, his mind racing. They were panicking. Good. Let them panic. Let them tear the house apart looking. They'd never find the trapdoor beneath the floorboards, not if they hadn't found it in all these years. He spent the day preparing. He went through Theodore's documents and found something crucial, a letter, sealed and dated just months before his death in 1997. It was addressed to whom it may concern and detailed the entire collection, its location, and his wishes for its distribution. "I leave this collection to whoever finds it," Theodore had written. "Not to my blood family who value only money, but to the person clever enough, desperate enough, or worthy enough to discover my sanctuary. May it serve you better than my fortune served me." It was a will, an unconventional one, but with witness signatures and a notary seal. Legal enough to matter. Darius also found something else in Theodore's papers, evidence of Gerald's debts going back decades. Gambling losses, bad investments, extravagant purchases, all funded by Theodore, who'd carefully documented every dollar his son had squandered. There were letters too, from Theodore to Gerald, begging him to be more responsible, to think of the future, to stop treating money like an infinite resource. Gerald had never listened, and Theodore had stopped giving. The picture that emerged was damning. Celeste's father wasn't the successful businessman he pretended to be. He was a man living on inherited wealth, burning through it as fast as he could, maintaining a facade of success while drowning in debt. The Hartwells weren't wealthy. They were broke. Which explained why they wanted Owen so badly. He was Celeste's heir, and Celeste had a life insurance policy, not huge, but enough to matter to people who had nothing left. Darius understood now. This wasn't just about custody. It was about money, Celeste's money, Owen's money, the life insurance that Darius had been carefully saving for Owen's education. They'd planned to take Owen, take the insurance money, and let Darius freeze to death in a locked room during a blizzard. No witnesses, no questions, just tragic circumstances and a convenient end to their problem. But they'd locked him in the one room in the entire property that held the solution to everything. That night, as Owen slept, Darius allowed himself to remember. He thought about the first time he'd met Vivian and Gerald, how they'd looked at Celeste's engagement ring, a simple band he'd saved for months to buy, with barely concealed disdain. He remembered the wedding, small and beautiful, held in a community center because they couldn't afford a venue. Vivian had complained the entire time, loudly enough for other guests to hear. "My daughter, married in a community center like common people." He remembered Owen's birth. How Vivian had visited the hospital once, looked at her grandson and said, "Well, at least the baby looks like a Hartwell." As if Owen's worth was only in his bloodline, not in his existence. Est away from him. He remembered Celeste's funeral. Vivian crying dramatic tears while wearing designer black, accepting condolences like she was the only one who'd lost someone. Never once acknowledging Darius's grief or Owen's, or the fact that Darius had lost his partner, his love, his future. And he remembered the silence that followed, 8 months without a word from Celeste's family until they needed something. Until they decided to take what remained of Celeste away from him. The memories hardened something in Darius's chest. He'd spent so long trying to be good enough for these people, trying to prove his worth. But their judgment had never been about him. It had been about their own insecurities, their own failures, their own desperate need to feel superior to someone. Well, he was done trying to prove anything to them. On the 5th day, Darius heard trucks, snowplows clearing the mountain road. It was time. He gathered the most important documents from Theodore's papers, the will, the inventory, letters proving Gerald's financial situation. He carefully photographed pages from the journal with his phone, which he'd been charging using a solar charger he'd found in the camping supplies. He took pictures of the collection, focusing on the pieces Theodore had noted were most valuable. Then he did something that felt both terrifying and right. He took the British Guiana stamp, still in its climate-controlled case, and tucked it carefully into his jacket's inner pocket. Insurance. Proof. Leverage. "We're leaving, buddy," he told Owen. "But not the way we came in." Darius had found another exit during his explorations, a tunnel that led from the far side of the chamber to an old root cellar 100 yards from the main house. It was narrow, cold, and dark, but it was a way out that didn't involve the Hartwells. They crawled through together, Darius first with the flashlight, Owen right behind him. It took 20 minutes of slow progress before they emerged into the root cellar, which had an exterior door that opened blessedly from the inside. Fresh air hit Darius's face like a blessing. The world was white, blinding in its snow coverage, but beautiful. The sun was out. The sky was blue. They'd survived. "Where are we going, Dad?" Owen asked as they trudged through knee-deep snow toward where Darius had parked his car 5 days ago. "To town. To the police. And then, buddy, we're going to make sure your great-great-grandfather's wishes are honored and that the people who try to hurt us never hurt anyone again." The Camry was buried in snow, but it started after some coaxing. Darius had never been so grateful for a reliable engine in his life. He drove slowly down the mountain, away from the house where he'd almost died, away from people who'd valued money more than human life. In his pocket, a $9 million stamp rested against his heart. Behind him, in an ice-cold cellar beneath a forgotten room, a fortune waited. And ahead of him, justice. The man they tried to destroy was about to show them exactly what he was capable of. The police station in Ridgemont was small, just 3 desks and a holding cell that probably hadn't been used in years. Sheriff Tom Brennan looked up from his computer when Darius walked in, Owen clutching his hand, both of them still wearing layers of old clothes from Theodore's cellar. "Help you?" he asked. Then his eyes widened as he took in their appearance. "Sir, are you okay? Do you need medical attention?" "I need to file a report," Darius said, his voice steadier than he felt. "About attempted murder." 20 minutes later, Sheriff Brennan sat across from him, his expression growing darker with every word. Darius told him everything, the custody papers, the locked room, the freezing temperatures, the conversations he'd overheard. He showed him the photos on his phone, the room with its single thin blanket, the locked door, the timestamp showing when he'd taken them. "And you're saying they left you there?" "Knowing the temperature." "They were waiting for us to die," Darius said flatly. "So they could take my son and claim it was an accident." Owen sat beside him, coloring on paper the deputy had provided, but Darius knew he was listening to every word. Sheriff Brennan leaned back in his chair. "The Hartwell family. Gerald Hartwell. You know them. Everyone knows them. Big property owners up on the mountain. Gerald's father, Theodore, used to come into town sometimes. Nice man, quiet. Gerald, though." He shook his head. "There have been complaints over the years. Nothing that stuck. But the man has a reputation for thinking rules don't apply to him." "They don't just think rules don't apply," Darius said. "They think people don't apply. People like me, anyway." The sheriff studied him for a long moment. "Where'd you stay during the blizzard? If you got out of that room?" Darius had prepared for this question. "I found a cellar under the floorboards. There were supplies there, old camping equipment. We survived. A cellar under the caretaker's quarters." Sheriff Brennan frowned. "You know, I grew up around here. Used to play in those woods as a kid. Never knew there was a cellar there." His eyes narrowed slightly. "What else was in this cellar?" Darius met his gaze. "Things that belong to me now, according to Theodore Hartwell's will." He pulled out the letter, the one Theodore had sealed and notarized. Sheriff Brennan read it slowly, his eyebrows climbing higher with each paragraph. He left his collection to whoever found it, the sheriff said quietly. Not to his family. His family tried to kill me, Darius replied. They can't profit from that. No, sir. They cannot. He stood up. I'm going to need to go up to that property, see this room, document everything. And I'm going to need to have a conversation with Gerald Hartwell and his family. They don't know I'm alive, Darius said. They think I'm dead in that room or frozen somewhere on the mountain. The sheriff's jaw tightened. Then I think we'll surprise them. But first, Darius had other business to attend to. He left Owen with a kind deputy's wife who ran a daycare and drove his battered Camry to the Ridgemorn Public Library. It was a small building, but it had computers with internet access. Darius spent the next 4 hours researching. He looked up rare stamp values, searched for auction records, found articles about famous collectors and their acquisitions. He cross-referenced Theodore's inventory with current market prices, checking every item he could verify online. The numbers made him dizzy. If anything, Theodore had been conservative in his estimates. Some of the items had appreciated far beyond what he'd projected. The Edward Hopper painting alone was worth at least $15 million at current market rates. The Stradivarius violin, he found records of a similar one selling for $18 million. And the stamp. The British Guiana one sent magenta. The last auction record he found was from 2014, when it had sold for $9.5 million. That was 11 years ago. Current estimates put its value at over $12 million. Darius sat back from the computer, his hands shaking. He'd thought he understood the magnitude of what Theodore had hidden. He'd been wrong. This wasn't just a fortune. This was generational wealth. This was enough to change not just his life, but Owen's life, and his children's lives, and their children's lives. He thought about the man he'd been 5 days ago, struggling to make rent, working hourly shifts at the warehouse, always worried about the next bill, the next crisis. Living small because small was all he could afford. That man was gone. The man sitting in this library was someone different. Someone who'd survived attempted murder. Someone who'd discovered a treasure. Someone who'd been given a second chance. He printed everything he could, documentation of values, auction records, articles about the collector's market. Then he made a call to a number he'd found, a Margaret Santos, an estate attorney in Denver who specialized in unusual inheritance cases. Miss Santos, my name is Darius Mitchell, and I have a situation that I think you'll find interesting. Margaret Santos arrived in Ridgemorn 2 days later. She was in her 50s, impeccably dressed, with sharp eyes that missed nothing. Darius met her at the diner on Main Street, Owen coloring in the booth beside him. Mr. Mitchell, she said, shaking his hand. Your phone call was intriguing, to say the least. Thank you for coming. Well, when someone tells me they've discovered a $295 million collection hidden in a cellar, with documentation that leaves it to them rather than the deceased's legal heirs, I tend to get on a plane. Darius pulled out the folder he'd assembled, Theodore's letter, the inventory pages he'd photographed, the documentation of the Hartwell's attempt on his life, his marriage certificate to Celeste, Owen's birth certificate establishing him as Theodore's great-great-grandson. Margaret read through everything methodically, occasionally making notes. When she finished, she set down her pen and looked at Darius with something like respect. This is extraordinary, she said. The will is unusual, but it's properly notarized and witnessed. Theodore Hartwell was clearly of sound mind when he wrote it. The fact that he hid the collection and explicitly stated his wish for it to go to whoever discovered it rather than his legal heirs gives you a strong case. But Gerald is his son, Darius said. Won't he contest it? Almost certainly. But here's the thing, Mr. Mitchell, Gerald and his family tried to kill you. There's a police investigation ongoing. Under the law, you cannot profit from your own criminal actions. If they're charged with attempted murder, or even if the evidence is strong enough that it would go to trial, their claim to Theodore's estate becomes significantly weakened. What about the fact that the collection was hidden on their property? Legally complicated, but Theodore's letter makes his intention clear. He didn't want his family to have it. He took elaborate steps to hide it, and he left instructions that whoever found it should have it. Margaret leaned forward. The question is, what do you want to do with it? Darius looked at Owen, coloring a picture of a house with a garden, a house bigger than their cramped apartment, a house with room to grow. I want to honor Theodore's wishes, he said slowly. He loved these things. He didn't collect them just for their value, but because they meant something to him. I don't want to just sell everything off. Then we'll need to establish a trust, create a foundation perhaps. We can ensure the collection is preserved, displayed, appreciated. Some pieces can be sold to provide you with immediate financial security, but the core of the collection can remain intact. And my son will be provided for. More than provided for. Margaret smiled. Mr. Mitchell, if we handle this correctly, your son will want for nothing for the rest of his life. Neither will you. Neither will your grandchildren, should you have them. Darius felt tears prick his eyes. 5 days ago I was locked in a freezing room, waiting to die. And now you're sitting across from me discussing how to manage a fortune. Margaret's expression softened. I've been doing this work for 30 years, Mr. Mitchell. I've seen a lot of inheritance cases, a lot of family drama. This is different. This is justice. Over the next week, Margaret worked with Sheriff Brennan to document everything. They photographed the cellar, the collection, the room where Darius had been locked. They took statements from Darius, from the deputy who'd received his initial report, from the snowplow driver who confirmed the roads had been impassable for 4 days. And they began the process of formally charging Gerald, Vivian, and Vanessa Hartwell with attempted murder. Darius stayed at a small motel in Ridgemorn, paying with what little money he had left. Margaret wanted him to stay somewhere nicer on her firm's account, but he refused. He wasn't ready for handouts yet, even from people trying to help. On the 8th day after the blizzard, Sheriff Brennan went to the mountain house to question the Hartwell family. Darius asked to go with him. He needed to see their faces when they realized he was alive. The drive up the mountain was surreal. The road was clear now, the snow pushed to the sides in high banks. The house looked different in the sunshine, less imposing, almost peaceful. Smoke curled from the chimney. Sheriff Brennan knocked on the door. Vivian answered, her face carefully composed, until she saw Darius standing behind the sheriff. The color drained from her face. "Hello, Vivian," Darius said quietly. Vivian's mouth opened and closed. No sound came out. "Mrs. Hartwell, I need to speak with you and your family," Sheriff Brennan said. "About the events of February 12th through 16th. Gerald and Vanessa appeared in the hallway behind Vivian. They had the same shocked expression, the same inability to process what they were seeing. "You're alive," Vanessa said stupidly. "Disappointed?" Darius asked. We thought the room was empty." "We called the police," Vanessa stammered. "You called the police?" Sheriff Brennan raised an eyebrow. "When, exactly?" "Yesterday," Gerald said, finding his voice. "When we discovered Darius and Owen were missing from the room we'd given them." "The room you locked them in," Darius said. "During a blizzard. With no heat. No blankets. No way to escape." "That's ridiculous," Vivian snapped, recovering. "We gave you shelter. If you chose to leave in dangerous weather, that's your decision." "The door was locked from the outside," Darius said. "I heard you, all of you, talking about how by morning you'd find us dead and how convenient that would be for your custody case." "You're making this up," Vanessa said, but her voice lacked conviction. Sheriff Brennan pulled out his notebook. "Mr. Hartwell, Mrs. Hartwell, Miss Hartwell, I need you to come down to the station to answer some questions about the events of February 12th, specifically about the conditions of the room where Mr. Darius Mitchell and his son Owen were staying, and about your knowledge of those conditions." "This is harassment," Vivian said. "Our lawyer will meet you at the station, I'm sure," Sheriff Brennan finished. "But you are going to answer questions one way or another." Darius watched them scramble. Watched Vivian's perfect composure crack. Watched Gerald's confident demeanor crumble. These people who'd looked down on him, who'd judged him, who'd tried to kill him, they looked small now. Frightened. Human. There's one more thing, Darius said. Theodore's collection. The one hidden in the cellar beneath the caretaker's quarters. The one worth $295 million. Theodore left instructions that it should go to whoever found it, not to his legal heirs. I found it, and I have documentation proving his wishes. The silence that followed was absolute. Then Vivian laughed, a brittle, broken sound. There is no collection, she said. Theodore died penniless. He squandered everything on his ridiculous hobbies. There's nothing left. That's what he wanted you to think, Darius said. That's what he spent years making you believe. But he was smarter than all of you. He hid the things he loved, protected them from people who only saw dollar signs, and he left them to someone worthy. You, Vanessa spat. You're not worthy of anything. You're nobody. Darius smiled. And it wasn't a kind smile. I'm the nobody who survived what you did. I'm the nobody who found what your grandfather hid. I'm the nobody who's about to make sure you never hurt anyone again. This is absurd, Gerald said, but his voice shook. You can't prove any of this. Actually, Margaret Santos said, stepping out of the sheriff's car where she'd been waiting, he can. I'm Margaret Santos, Mr. Mitchell's attorney, and I have quite a lot of documentation about Theodore's collection, his wishes, and the events of February 12th through 16th. I look forward to presenting it all in court. The drive back down the mountain was quiet. Owen had stayed in town with the deputy's wife, spared from seeing his grandmother's hatred, his grandfather's weakness, his aunt's cruelty. You did good, Sheriff Brennan said as they drove. Standing up to them like that. I didn't have a choice, Darius replied. They tried to take everything from me. My son, my life. They thought I was weak. You proved them wrong. Darius looked out at the snow-covered trees, thinking about the man he'd been 8 months ago when Celeste died. That man had been strong, but he'd also been trying to make himself smaller, trying to fit into spaces that were never meant for him. No, he said. I proved them right. I was weak. I let them make me feel less than. But then they locked me in that room and something changed. You can't be weak when someone's trying to kill you. You have to be strong or you die. And now? Now I'm going to make sure Theodore's legacy goes where it should. To museums, to universities, to places where people will appreciate it. And I'm going to make sure my son grows up knowing he came from strength, not wealth. That what matters is who you are, not what you have. Back in town, Darius finally allowed himself to break down. He sat in his motel room after Owen went to sleep and cried, not from sadness, but from relief, from exhaustion, from the sudden overwhelming understanding that he was safe, that Owen was safe, that they'd survived. His phone rang. An unknown number. He almost didn't answer, but something made him pick up. Darius? A man's voice, familiar but distant. Who is this? It's Marcus. Marcus Chen. We worked together at the warehouse, remember? Before you married Celeste. Darius did remember. Marcus had been one of the few people who'd been genuinely happy for him when he got engaged. Marcus. Hi. How did you get this number? I saw the news about the Hartwell family being questioned by police about allegations of attempted murder. Darius, is it true? Did they really try to kill you? Yes, Darius said simply. Silence. Then, I always knew they were awful. The way they treated you at the wedding, the things Vivian would say. But this? Darius, I'm so sorry. I survived. The news is also saying something about a collection. About Theodore Hartwell having hidden valuables. Darius smiled despite himself. News travels fast in small towns. Is it real? The collection? Yes, it's real. Marcus laughed, amazed. My God. So you're rich? Yeah, Darius finished. I guess I am. Or I will be once all the legal stuff is settled. What are you going to do? Darius looked around the cramped motel room, at Owen sleeping peacefully in the double bed, at the bag of their belongings that still smelled like the ice cellar. He thought about Theodore's journal, about his careful notes, about how he'd loved beautiful things and protected them from people who only saw value, not beauty. I'm going to make sure Theodore's collection is preserved, he said. I'm going to establish a foundation in his name. And I'm going to take my son somewhere safe, somewhere warm, and we're going to build a life that matters. You always did have more strength than you gave yourself credit for, Marcus said softly. After they hung up, Darius opened his laptop and began to write. Not legal documents, Margaret was handling those, but something personal. A letter to Theodore, even though he'd been dead for 28 years. Dear Theodore, I'm the man who found your sanctuary. I was married to your great-granddaughter, Celeste, though she died last year. Your family tried to kill me and take my son, your great-great-grandson, Owen. They locked us in a freezing room and waited for us to die. But your hidden cellar saved us. Your provisions kept us alive. Your documentation gave us justice. I don't know if you can hear me, but I want you to know, I understand why you hid these things. I understand why you didn't trust your family with them. And I promise I'll make sure they're preserved, appreciated, loved the way you loved them, not just as valuable objects, but as pieces of history, as beauty worth protecting. Thank you for your sanctuary. Thank you for being smarter than the people who thought they knew you. Thank you for leaving something for someone like me, someone your family thought was worthless. You saved my life. Now I'll honor yours. He saved the document and closed the laptop. Outside, Ridgemorn slept under its blanket of snow. Tomorrow he'd meet with Margaret again to discuss the foundation. Tomorrow, Sheriff Brennan would formally charge the Hartwell family. Tomorrow, his new life would begin in earnest. But tonight, he was just Darius, a father, a survivor, a man who'd found treasure in the place he was meant to die. The preliminary hearing was set for 3 weeks later. Darius spent that time in a strange limbo, caught between his old life and whatever was coming next. He couldn't go back to his apartment, the lease had expired and his few possessions had been put in storage. He couldn't access Theodore's collection yet, it was evidence in the criminal case, sealed and protected. He existed in between, living on advances from Margaret's firm, waiting for the legal system to catch up with reality. Owen adapted better than Darius expected. Children were resilient that way. He colored, played with toys from the thrift store, and asked questions about his great-great-grandfather that Darius was still learning to answer. Was he nice, Dad? I think he was complicated. But he was smart, and he protected the things he loved. Like you protected me. Darius pulled his son close. Yeah, buddy. Like that. The news coverage intensified. Small-town papers picked up the story first, local family charged with attempted murder. Then larger outlets, hidden fortune discovered after blizzard survival. Then national news, $295 million collection found in mountain cellar. Reporters called constantly. Darius refused all interviews. This wasn't about publicity. This was about justice. But one call he did take was from the Smithsonian Institution. The curator of their postal history department had heard about the British Guiana one sent magenta and wanted to verify its authenticity. Mr. Mitchell, if this stamp is genuine, it's one of the most significant philatelic discoveries in decades. We'd like to send an expert to examine it, with your permission of course. I want it authenticated, Darius said. Theodore's documentation is thorough, but I need independent verification for legal purposes. We can provide that. And Mr. Mitchell, if you're considering selling or donating any pieces of the collection, the Smithsonian would be honored to discuss options. Dr. Helena Strauss arrived from Washington, D.C. 2 days later. She was in her 60s, with white hair and eyes that lit up when Darius carefully revealed the stamp in its climate-controlled case. Oh my, Dr. Strauss breathed. May I? She examined it under magnification, consulted reference materials, took measurements. An hour later, she looked up with tears in her eyes. "It's genuine," she said. "Mr. Mitchell, this is the British Guiana 1-cent magenta. There is only one in the world, and you're holding it. Current estimated value is between $12 and $15 million, possibly more at auction." Darius sat down heavily. He believed Theodore's documentation, but hearing it confirmed by an expert made it real in a way it hadn't been before. "The rest of the collection," Dr. Strauss continued, "based on the inventory you showed me, is equally extraordinary. The Stradivarius alone is worth a fortune. The paintings, the first editions, the coins. Mr. Mitchell, your wife's great-grandfather assembled one of the finest private collections I've ever seen. And he hid it all beneath a house in the mountains where no one would think to look. He hid it from his family," Darius said, "because they only cared about money. Then he was wise to do so. Collections like this should be appreciated for what they represent, not just their monetary value." Dr. Strauss spent 3 days examining items from the collection, documenting, photographing, verifying. Each piece she authenticated added weight to Darius's case, both legally and emotionally. This wasn't just valuable. This was historically significant. This was important. On the day before the preliminary hearing, Vivian Hartwell called. Darius almost didn't answer, but something made him pick up. "What do you want, Vivian?" "To talk." "Just talk, please." Mantu, aside. "You have 5 minutes." "I know what we did was wrong," Vivian said, her voice tight. "I know we went too far. But you have to understand, we were desperate. Gerald's in debt. Deep debt. We thought if we had Owen, we could access Celeste's life insurance." "You mean my life insurance?" "The policy Celeste took out with me as the beneficiary. It should have gone to family." "I am family," Darius's voice rose. "I was Celeste's husband. Owen is her son. We're her family. You're just people who share her DNA." Silence. "Then, the collection. If it's really worth what the news is saying, we could split it. You keep half, we keep half. We drop the custody case, you drop the attempted murder charges. Everyone wins." Darius laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You tried to kill me, Vivian. You locked me and my son in a freezing room and waited for us to die. And now you want to negotiate. I'm trying to find a solution. The solution is simple. You go to jail. Theodore's collection stays with me. Owen stays with me. And you never come near us again. You vindictive little." Darius hung up. His hands were shaking, but not from fear, from rage. From the sheer audacity of these people who thought money could solve what they'd done. He called Margaret immediately. Vivian just tried to negotiate. Offered to split the collection if I dropped the charges. "Which proves they know they're guilty," Margaret said with satisfaction. "Don't take any more calls from them. Let them talk to their lawyer and let me do my job." The preliminary hearing took place in the Ridgemont Courthouse, a building that was probably beautiful once but now showed its age. Darius sat at the prosecution table, Owen with the deputy's wife in the hallway. He didn't want his son to hear this. Gerald, Vivian, and Vanessa sat across the aisle with their lawyer, a smooth man in an expensive suit who kept whispering urgently in Gerald's ear. The judge was a woman in her 50s named Ellen Vasquez. She'd been on the bench for 20 years and had a reputation for no-nonsense rulings. Sheriff Brennan testified first, describing the room where Darius had been locked, the temperature, the conditions. He submitted photos showing the single thin blanket, the window painted shut, the lack of heating. "In your professional opinion, Sheriff, could someone survive a night in that room during a blizzard?" "Not without additional resources, Your Honor. The temperature in that room during the blizzard dropped to approximately 28 degrees Fahrenheit. With no heat source, minimal insulation, and only a thin blanket, hypothermia would set in within hours, especially for a child." The defense lawyer stood. "But they did survive, correct? Which suggests the conditions weren't as dire as claimed." They survived, Sheriff Brennan said dryly, because Mr. Mitchell found a hidden cellar with supplies. Not because the room was safe. Darius testified next, describing the custody papers, the locked door, the conversations he'd overheard. Margaret walked him through everything methodically, building the case piece by piece. When the defense lawyer cross-examined him, he was aggressive. "Mr. Mitchell, isn't it true you were behind on rent payments at your apartment?" "Yes." "And that you worked long hours, often leaving your son with neighbors?" "I worked to support my son, yes." "Isn't it possible my clients were genuinely concerned about your ability to provide adequate care?" Darius looked at him steadily. "If they were concerned, they would have offered help, food, money, childcare. Instead, they offered custody papers and a freezing room." Judge Vasquez's expression showed what she thought of that answer. The hearing lasted 6 hours. In the end, Judge Vasquez ruled that there was sufficient evidence to move forward with attempted murder charges. She also ruled that Theodore's letter constituted a valid testamentary document, giving Darius claim to the collection pending further legal review. Gerald, Vivian, and Vanessa were released on bail, but with conditions. They were to have no contact with Darius or Owen, and they were forbidden from entering the mountain property. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed. Darius made one brief statement. Theodore Hartwell loved beautiful things and protected them from people who only saw profit. His collection will be preserved and shared with the world in his honor and in his name. That's all I have to say. That night, back at the motel, Darius let himself imagine the future. A real house. Security. Education for Owen. Maybe even going back to school himself, pursuing art, something he'd always dreamed of but never dared to pursue. But more than that, doing something meaningful with Theodore's legacy. Creating a foundation that would teach people about history, about art, about the value of preserving beautiful things. Giving other people opportunities he'd never had. The man who'd been locked in a freezing room was gone. The man who remained was someone new, someone stronger, someone ready to build a life worth living. And it all started with a sanctuary beneath the snow and an old man who'd been wise enough to protect what mattered most. The trial began on a warm day in May, 3 months after Darius had driven down that mountain road with Owen beside him and a $9 million stamp in his pocket. The courthouse steps were crowded with reporters, cameras, and curious onlookers from 3 counties over. What had started as a local scandal had become a national story: wealth, attempted murder, hidden treasure, and a single father fighting for justice. Darius walked up those steps in a navy blue suit that Margaret had helped him buy. It was the first expensive piece of clothing he'd ever owned, and it felt like armor. Owen was safe with Marcus back at the small house Darius had rented on the edge of Ridgemont, not the motel anymore, not charity. A real house with a backyard and neighbors who waved when they saw him. Inside the courtroom, Gerald, Vivian, and Vanessa sat at the defense table. Vivian wore pearls and a designer dress, her silver hair styled perfectly. Gerald had lost weight, his expensive suit hanging loose on his frame. Vanessa kept her eyes down, jaw clenched. They looked like what they were, wealthy people unaccustomed to consequences. The prosecution was led by District Attorney Rebecca Martinez, no relation to Margaret, but equally fierce in her pursuit of justice. She was in her 40s with sharp eyes and a reputation for never backing down. "Your Honor, members of the jury," Rebecca began her opening statement. "This case is about many things. It's about greed. It's about cruelty. But most of all, it's about what happens when people value money more than human life." The defendants locked Darius Mitchell and his 7-year-old son in a freezing room during the worst blizzard in 50 years. They knew the conditions. They knew the danger. And they waited for nature to do what they couldn't bring themselves to do directly: eliminate the man standing between them and what they wanted. The defense lawyer, Theodore Marks, painted a different picture. This is about a misunderstanding blown out of proportion by a man with financial motives. "My clients offered shelter during a storm. Mr. Mitchell chose to leave that shelter and hide in a cellar, then invented a story about attempted murder to justify his claim to property that rightfully belongs to the Hartwell family. The first week of testimony established the timeline. The snowplow driver testified about the road conditions, how nothing could have gotten through for 4 days. The weather service provided data showing temperatures had dropped to -12 degrees Fahrenheit during the blizzard's peak. A structural engineer testified about the room's lack of insulation, its single-pane window, its distance from any heat source. In your professional opinion, Rebecca asked, could someone survive overnight in that room under those conditions without additional heat sources? Not likely, the engineer said. Hypothermia would set in within 2 to 4 hours, especially for a child. Death would follow within 8 to 12 hours. Theodore cross-examined aggressively. But Mr. Mitchell and his son did survive, correct? Because they found alternate shelter. So the room wasn't necessarily deadly. The room was deadly, the engineer said firmly. He simply didn't stay in it. Darius testified on the 4th day. He kept his voice steady as he described driving through the snow, arriving at the house, the cold reception. He told the jury about the custody papers, about Vivian's cruel words, about being shown to the freezing room. What did you think when you saw the room? Rebecca asked. I thought it was a mistake at first, that Vanessa had shown us the wrong room. But then she left, and I heard the lock turn. You heard the door being locked? Yes. From the outside. What did you do? I tried to keep my son warm. We had one thin blanket. I wrapped him in my coat, but the temperature kept dropping, and I knew we wouldn't make it through the night. Darius described finding the trapdoor, descending into Theodore's cellar, discovering the supplies that saved their lives. He told them about the journal, about reading Theodore's words by lamplight while his son slept. Why didn't you call for help? Theodore asked during cross-examination. My phone was dead. There was no signal anyway, that far up the mountain. But you could have broken the window, called out. Into a blizzard with wind so loud I couldn't hear myself think? And risk freezing even faster. Darius looked at him steadily. I made the choice that kept my son alive. That's what fathers do. The courtroom was silent. One juror, a woman about Darius's age, wiped her eyes. The prosecution's most damning evidence came from an unexpected source, Vivian's own phone. Sheriff Brennan had obtained a warrant, and the forensic analysis revealed text messages sent the morning after the blizzard started. Rebecca read them aloud. Vivian to Gerald, 7:43 a.m., still no sound from the back room. How long do you think? Gerald to Vivian, 7:51 a.m., could be hours yet. Let's wait until noon. Vanessa to Gerald, 9:17 a.m., this is taking too long. What if someone comes? Gerald to Vanessa, 9:22 a.m., no one's coming. Roads are closed. Relax. The jury looked horrified. Even Theodore seemed shaken. Vivian took the stand in her own defense, trying to explain away the messages. We were concerned about Darius's well-being. We wanted to give him privacy but were monitoring the situation. By waiting for him to die? Rebecca asked. We had no reason to believe he was in danger. You offered him shelter in a room with no heat during a blizzard. It was the only room available. Rebecca pulled up photos on the courtroom screen, the main house, spacious and warm, multiple bedrooms, a leather couch by a roaring fire. You're telling this jury that in a house with 5 bedrooms, a finished basement, and multiple common areas, the only available space for your son-in-law and grandson was an unheated storage room. Vivian's lips pressed into a thin line. She wasn't grateful for what we offered. Because what you offered was death. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. When they returned, the foreman stood and delivered the verdict. Guilty on all counts. Attempted murder. Reckless endangerment of a child. Conspiracy. The courtroom erupted. Vivian's sob was drowned out by the murmur of voices. Gerald sat frozen, his face gray. Vanessa put her head in her hands. Judge Vasquez set sentencing for 2 weeks later. As the defendants were led away, Vivian turned and looked directly at Darius. There was hate in her eyes, but also something else, defeat. the recognition that she'd lost everything. Darius felt no triumph, only exhaustion. Justice didn't erase what had happened. It didn't bring Celeste back or undo the trauma. But it was something. It was acknowledgement. It was the world saying, what happened to you was wrong, and it matters. Outside, reporters shouted questions. Darius made a brief statement. I'm grateful for the jury's decision. I hope this sends a message that you cannot harm people just because you think they're beneath you. Everyone deserves safety. Everyone deserves dignity, no matter who they are or where they come from. That evening, Margaret came to Darius's rented house with champagne and documents. The civil case is settled, she said, popping the cork while Owen cheered. Gerald tried to contest Theodore's will, but given the criminal convictions and the documentation, the judge ruled in your favor. The collection is legally yours. Darius sat down heavily. All of it? Every stamp, every painting, every coin. $295,783,000 worth of art, history, and legacy. It's yours, Darius. Congratulations. Owen climbed into Darius's lap. Does this mean we're rich, Dad? It means we're safe, buddy. It means you'll never have to worry about having enough. It means you can go to college, travel, do anything you dream of. Can I have a puppy? Darius laughed, the sound breaking something open inside his chest. Yeah, buddy. You can have a puppy. Over the next few months, Darius worked with Margaret and a team of experts to establish the Theodore Hartwell Legacy Foundation. They catalogued every item in the collection, verified authenticity, assessed condition. Dr. Strauss from the Smithsonian returned multiple times, each visit revealing new treasures. The Stradivarius violin was dated to 1709, one of only 600 still in existence. The paintings included not just the Hopper but works by Mary Cassatt, Winslow Homer, and a small watercolor by John Singer Sargent. The stamp collection was extraordinary beyond the British Guiana. There were rare issues from Sweden, Hawaii, Mauritius, each with its own story. Darius made careful decisions about what to keep, what to sell, what to donate. The British Guiana stamp went to the Smithsonian, a donation that made national news. The Stradivarius went to a young violinist from Detroit who couldn't afford an instrument worthy of her talent, a loan, not a gift, because Theodore would have wanted it played, not locked away. Paintings were divided between museums and galleries, with stipulations that they be displayed with information about Theodore's life and his passion for preservation. First edition books went to university libraries. Coins went to numismatic societies and historical museums. Darius kept some things, a small painting of a mountain landscape that reminded him of the view from the cellar, a first edition of The Great Gatsby because it had been Celeste's favorite book, a few gold coins, more for their beauty than their value. And he sold strategically. A minor Hopper painting brought $8 million at auction. Some of the rarer stamps sold to private collectors for amounts that made Darius's head spin. Within 6 months, the foundation had an endowment of $43 million. And Darius personally had more money than he'd ever imagined. But money, he discovered, didn't change who you were. It just revealed it. He bought a modest house in Ridgemont, 3 bedrooms, a yard, nothing ostentatious. He could have bought a mansion, but he remembered what it felt like to be locked in a cold room in a big house owned by people with no warmth in their hearts. He wanted a home, not a statement. He opened an art studio in town, a real one with proper lighting and modern equipment, offering affordable classes to local kids and adults who wanted to learn. He hired instructors, provided scholarships, and created a space where creativity mattered more than money. The man they tried to destroy. They told him he'd freeze to death before morning, left him and his child alone in that abandoned house during the worst blizzard in 50 years. But what his cruel in-laws didn't know was that beneath those frozen floorboards lay a secret worth $295 million. The man they tried to destroy became unstoppable, not because of the fortune he found, but because of the strength he discovered within himself. Theodore Hartwell's sanctuary didn't just save Darius's life, it revealed what he was truly capable of when pushed to the edge. Justice was served. The collection was preserved. And a single father proved that sometimes survival is just the beginning of something extraordinary. She hired 3 mechanics, including Marcus, and made sure they earned fair wages with good benefits. Above the door, a sign read, "Mitchell Auto and Art, everyone welcome." He'd kept Celeste's name in spirit, honoring the woman who'd loved him when he was just a warehouse worker with paint under his nails. The woman who'd seen his worth when her family saw only his paycheck. The foundation grew. Darius established scholarships for working-class students pursuing careers in art restoration, museum studies, and historical preservation. He funded free days at museums so families who couldn't afford admission could still experience beauty. He created grants for small-town libraries to acquire rare books and make them accessible to communities that might never see a first edition otherwise. And he started speaking, at first just to local groups, community centers, shelters, anyone who asked. He told his story not for sympathy, but to show what survival looked like, to prove that you could start with nothing, face death, and still build something meaningful. Word spread. Larger venues invited him, a TEDx talk, a keynote at a national conference on family law, an interview on a morning talk show where he brought Owen, now 8 years old and articulate beyond his years. "My dad is the strongest person in the world," Owen told the interview. "Bad people tried to hurt us, but he saved us, and now he helps other people." The interview turned to Darius. "You've donated or loaned out most of Theodore's collection. You could have kept it all, sold it all, lived in luxury. Why didn't you?" Darius thought about how to answer. Because Theodore didn't collect these things for their value. He collected them for their beauty, their history, what they represented. He hid them from people who only saw dollar signs. "If I just sold everything and kept the money, I would have been no better than the family that tried to kill me." Theodore left his collection to whoever found it, not to make them rich, but to give them a choice. "I chose to honor what he loved." And what about the family? Gerald, Vivian, and Vanessa Hartwell. They're in prison, where they belong. Gerald got 15 years. Vivian got 12. Vanessa got 18 because she had a prior assault charge. They'll have time to think about what greed cost them. Do you hate them? Darius considered this. Once, maybe. In those first days after the blizzard when fear and rage were all I could feel. But now? I pity them, he said finally. They had everything, family, health, opportunities, and they threw it all away because they couldn't see past their own entitlement. They thought people like me were disposable. They were wrong. A year after the trial, Darius stood in the newly opened Theodore Hartwell Gallery in downtown Denver. It was a beautiful space, climate-controlled and carefully designed, housing rotating exhibits from the collection. The opening display featured the story of Theodore's life alongside 20 pieces he particularly loved, stamps, paintings, books, coins. Hundreds of people attended the opening, art lovers, historians, collectors, and ordinary people who'd read about the hidden treasure and wanted to see it for themselves. Darius moved through the crowd in a simple black suit, Owen at his side in a navy one with a silver tie. Dr. Strauss approached them, smiling. "Darius, this is extraordinary. Theodore would be so proud." "I hope so. I tried to do right by him." "You did more than that. You've made his passion accessible. You've turned a private collection into public inspiration." She gestured around the room. "Look at these people. They're not just seeing valuable objects. They're experiencing history, beauty, human achievement. That's what collecting should be about." Later, as the crowd thinned, Darius stood in front of Theodore's portrait. It hung near the entrance, a photograph from 1965 showing a man in his 50s with kind eyes and paint-stained hands. He'd been working on something artistic when the photo was taken, his focus intense but gentle. "Thank you," Darius whispered to the image. "For building a sanctuary. For protecting what mattered. For leaving it to someone who needed it." Owen tugged his hand. "Dad, can we go home now? I'm tired." "Yeah, buddy. Let's go home." They walked out into the Denver evening, the city lights reflecting off fresh snow. Darius held his son's hand and thought about how far they'd come, from a freezing room where they were meant to die, to a life filled with purpose, security, and hope. The fortune was extraordinary. But what Theodore really gave him was proof that survival could lead to something beautiful, that the people who tried to break you could be wrong, and that sometimes the greatest treasure isn't what you find, it's who you become while finding it. You could see tools in the background. He was a mechanic too, someone said behind her. Maya turned to find an elderly woman, probably in her 80s, leaning on a cane. "I'm sorry?" Maya asked. "Edgar Roberts," the woman said. Before he started collecting, he ran a repair shop. Fixed cars, motorcycles, anything with an engine. That's how he made his first money before he married into the Roberts family. The woman smiled. "I'm Dorothy Chen. Edgar and my late husband were friends back in the day." Maya's heart skipped. He was a mechanic. One of the best. Could diagnose a problem just by listening to an engine. Your husband David inherited that skill, you know. And you carry it too. How did you know about David? Maya whispered. Dorothy's eyes were warm. Edgar used to say his family didn't understand him. But maybe someday someone would come along who did. Someone who saw value in work, in craft, in beautiful things made by human hands. He said when that person showed up, they'd know what to do with his collection. She patted Maya's arm. "He was talking about you, dear. Even before you were born, he was talking about you." Maya felt tears prick her eyes. "I wish I could have met him." "In a way, you did. His sanctuary saved your life. His documentation gave you justice. His collection gave you choices. That's a kind of meeting, isn't it?" After Dorothy left, Maya stood alone in the gallery. Through the windows, she could see the Denver skyline, lights beginning to sparkle as evening fell. Somewhere in the mountains, snow was probably falling on the house where she'd almost died. But she wasn't there anymore. She was here, alive, strong, building something that mattered. Lily tugged on her hand. "Mama, can we go home now? I want to show Biscuit my picture from school." Biscuit was the puppy, a golden retriever who'd stolen both their hearts. Maya smiled down at her daughter. "Yeah, baby. Let's go home." The drive back to Pine Ridge took an hour. They listened to music, sang along badly, stopped for ice cream even though it was almost dinner time. Normal things. Precious things. The kind of things Maya had fought for in that frozen cellar. At home, Biscuit greeted them with enthusiastic barking. The house smelled like the pot roast Maya had put in the slow cooker that morning. Lily ran upstairs to change out of her dress, and Maya stood in her kitchen, in the house she owned free and clear, and marveled at how far she'd come. 18 months ago, she'd been behind on rent, working double shifts, grieving her husband, and terrified of losing her daughter. Now she was a philanthropist, a business owner, a public speaker. She employed people. She funded scholarships. She made a difference. But more than any of that, she was a mother who'd saved her daughter. A woman who'd survived. A person who'd turned trauma into triumph, not through revenge, but through building something good from the ashes of something terrible. Her phone buzzed. A text from Lawrence, Foundation Board approved your proposal for the Mechanic Scholarship Program. 15 students will receive full funding this year. Edgar would be proud. Maya typed back, "We would be proud." Then added, "Thank you for everything. You did the hard part." "I just pushed papers," he replied. But that wasn't true. Lawrence had believed her when she'd shown up at that diner with wild stories of hidden treasure and attempted murder. He'd fought for her, guided her, helped her navigate a world she'd never been part of. Good people existed. You just had to be brave enough to trust them. Later, after Lily was asleep and the house was quiet, Maya went to her home office. She'd turned the spare bedroom into a workspace, and on the wall hung several items from Edgar's collection that she'd kept for personal reasons: the mountain landscape painting, a photograph of Edgar in his workshop, tools arrayed behind him like a mechanic's altar, and the letter, his final letter, the one that had started everything. She read it again, though she'd memorized every word. "I leave this collection to whoever finds it. Not to my blood family who value only money, but to the person clever enough, desperate enough, or worthy enough to discover my sanctuary. May it serve you better than my fortune served me." "Clever enough," she murmured, smiling softly. "I just continued his work." That night, alone in the newly renovated house, Darius walked through the rooms one last time before they'd be filled with residents. He stopped in the library, ran his hand along the bookshelf where the trapdoor had once been hidden. The trapdoor was still there, preserved under glass as part of the exhibit. Visitors could see where Darius had found his escape, read Theodore's journal entries, understand the story of survival. He descended the stone steps into the cellar, now well-lit and temperature-controlled. The walls held photographs: Theodore in his workshop, Darius and Owen on the day they emerged from the blizzard, some of the collection pieces before they'd been distributed to museums, images of the trial, pictures of the Foundation's work. At the center of the room, where Theodore's safe had once stood, was a bronze sculpture, a father and child huddled together, looking up toward light. The plaque beneath read, "In honor of all who find strength in darkness and sanctuary in impossible places." Darius sat on the bench before the sculpture and let himself remember. Not just the terror, but the determination. Not just the cold, but the warmth of holding his son close. Not just the cruelty of the Hartwell family, but the kindness of Sheriff Brennan, Margaret, Dr. Strauss, and countless others who'd believed in him. His phone buzzed. A text from Owen, who was at a sleepover at Marcus's house. "Love you, Dad. Proud of you." Darius smiled, tears in his eyes. "Love you too, buddy. So proud of you." He climbed back up the stairs, turned off the lights, and locked the door. Tomorrow, the first residents would arrive, fathers who were scared, desperate, running from people who'd tried to break them. Darius would be there to welcome them, to tell them his story, to show them that survival was possible, that strength could be found in the darkest places, that you could start with nothing and build everything. Because he'd done it. And if he could, so could they. Darius Mitchell didn't start life with anything except determination and paint-stained hands. He'd been told he wasn't good enough, wasn't educated enough, wasn't worthy of marrying into the Hartwell family. He'd been mocked, dismissed, and ultimately left to die. But he'd survived. More than survived, he'd thrived. He'd found a hidden fortune and turned it into a legacy of beauty and opportunity. He'd proved that strength doesn't come from money or status. It comes from refusing to give up when the world tells you you're disposable. Theodore Hartwell had hidden his treasures from people who couldn't see their value. Darius Mitchell had taken those treasures and shown the world what they meant, not dollar signs, but history, beauty, human achievement, hope. And if his story proved anything, it was this: you don't need to be born rich to be worthy. You don't need fancy degrees to be smart. You don't need a big name to make a big difference. Sometimes all you need is the courage to open a trapdoor in the floor of a freezing room and trust that there's something better waiting below. Sometimes all you need is the strength to survive one more day, and then another, until you find yourself not just living but building a life that matters. Darius closed the journal and turned off the light. Tomorrow, he'd take Owen to the studio and teach him how to stretch canvas. The day after, they'd visit the Foundation offices and review grant applications. Next week, he'd speak at a conference for survivors of domestic violence. But tonight, he was just a father in a warm house with a sleeping son and a snoring dog. He was just a man who'd been through hell and come out the other side not broken, but forged into something stronger. The in-laws who'd tried to destroy him were behind bars. The fortune they'd coveted was being used to help others. And the man they dismissed as worthless had become someone people listened to, someone who mattered, someone who proved that your worth isn't determined by where you start, but by what you choose to do when you're given a chance. Theodore Hartwell had built a sanctuary beneath the snow. Darius Mitchell had turned that sanctuary into a legacy. And somewhere, he liked to think Theodore was watching and smiling, because he'd understood what Theodore had spent his whole life trying to protect. That the most valuable things in the world aren't the ones you can put a price on. They're the ones that matter: beauty, history, hope, love, and survival. Always survival. Anyone can rise from nothing if they refuse to stay down. Anyone can turn tragedy into triumph if they're brave enough to keep fighting. And anyone can build a legacy if they remember that what you do with your second chance matters more than why you needed one in the first place. Darius Mitchell started with nothing and was given everything. But he'd earned it, not by finding treasure, but by proving that even when the world tries to freeze you out, you can still find warmth if you're willing to dig deep enough to discover it. Up next, 2 more powerful stories are waiting for you. Click to keep discovering incredible journeys of survival and hope. And don't forget to hit subscribe if you believe that strength comes from within and that sometimes the coldest places hold the warmest treasures.